Welcome, everyone. I am Taryn Blake, the Community Engagement Program Manager for our PLM and EDA communities here at Siemens. And thank you for the thumbs up. We are here for another session of Community Conversations, our Technomatics virtual user group. And today's topic is what's new in version 2504. So very excited to introduce our guest speaker for today, which is Alex Dilg. He is one of our community catalysts, and he has almost 15 years as a consultant at Simplan AG. He specializes in simulation projects, support, and training using Technomatics plant simulation. His project focuses are intralogistics, covering both conveyor systems and vehicles, as well as library development for VDA and Simplan. So I refer to Alex as our AGV expert because he's done several, a little bit more advanced sessions on working with those. So definitely happy to have Alex walk us through some of the newer features in 2504. These are just a few of them. Of course, there's more than this, but he'll go through sequential assembly, the worker pool charts, multi-gaps on conveyors, store enhancements. And as always, we are here live. So Alex will go through these live. I'll be monitoring the chat. But we will have a time at the end just specifically for live Q&A. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask verbally, we're happy to take you off mute. You can use the hand raise button to do that, which you should be able to see in the middle upper menu on your screen to raise a hand. I see we have a hand raised now. I don't know if that's a question or if that was an attempt to use the reaction button, but if you do have a question you'd like to ask verbally, let me know in the chat and I'll come around. But with that, that's the last of my intro. Alex, you're welcome to take the screen.
Good, thanks for the introduction and welcome everybody to another session. Today we look at the new features of the 2504 version. It's been out for a couple of months now. I think we're already at patch level 3 or 4 by now. So it's by now, I would say it's a pretty stable release that you can use in your projects. So if you did not have time to look at the new features that the version provides, today I will give you a small overview over some of them, of course not all of them, because there are a lot of new features, so we can only cover a few of them. I give you a brief overview over some more general changes, and then we will look at some examples with some small models that I will then later also upload to the community. And as Taryn said, I'm one of the community catalysts. I have a profile in the community. You can find me here under the handle LXD_Simplan. And of course, when you look at the new version and you want to find out what new features there are and what you can now start using, you should always simply go into the help or look at the release notes. There's a specific section called What's New for the different versions, and you can just scroll through there. I took a small sample of some of these features. If you've looked at them already, then you will know it's a long list of features. Some of them are smaller things like functions that have been renamed or attributes that have renamed. There are new, bigger features, some smaller enhancements of some material flow objects and so on. Yeah, so that's always good to look at those, but we will not go through all of them in detail now. Some general changes for which I don't really have example models prepared specifically is that you can now choose a theme or theming for the plant simulation software. So if I close my full screen mode, you will then see that you can now have plant simulation running in dark mode. You can set in the preference that plant simulation should consider the Windows theming or always run in light mode or always in dark mode. You can choose. So here of course, I have to run the dark mode now since it's available. pretty cool, I think, but probably a preference thing. So you will notice that some of the icons will look or seem to look differently in the dark mode versus the old version or the light mode, specifically here with the folder names. Also, the Zimtalk method editor may look a little different. Of course, if the background is black, then they have to use different colors for the method program highlighting. Yeah. Some other smaller things that are pretty cool. For the data tables, you can now set default colors. So up until this version, you could change colors in your data tables to make some cells green or some rows yellow or whatever. But if you wanted to undo that, you basically had to set the cell to white, which is not the same as restoring it to the default setting. So that is now explicitly available, but it's just a small thing. But for me, I find it quite useful because I like to highlight in the data tables with colors a lot. So being able to easily revert the color to default setting is pretty cool. You can define frame backgrounds. You can see it in my small example model. I used some purple background as a demonstration, which goes nicely with the dark mode, but you can, of course, choose any color that you like. Another nice small addition is that you have now the option to use icons in the object dialogues. So when I open this source object here, you can see I have activated this feature. It's also available in the preferences. And then you see that the different tabs are simply showing a small icon, a small symbol. And only the tab that you activate will then also show the name that you are used to from the previous versions. So like here, controls and failures and so on. Yeah, I find it pretty nice because it makes the dialog more compact. You have all the tabs available at once. You don't have to do some scrolling or hiding some of the tabs. It's pretty cool, but of course you have to get used to identifying the icons. So for me, it takes a few seconds always to remember which was the tab that I wanted to go to. But I guess if you work with this for a while, this will get as natural as looking for the tab that reads exit or controls. Yeah, but it's an option. You don't have to use it. It's a preference thing. There were some changes regarding the toolbox icons. I think this is partly due to the dark mode and also in preparation for the next major release of 2026, where, in case you have not heard this yet and have also not read the release notes of this version yet, the important announcement for the version of next year is that the 2D visualization will be terminated. So new models starting in version 2606 will be only 3D only models, and previous older models have to be converted to 3D models if you want to keep using them in the new version. Yeah, but that's just a preview for next year. I don't think we should get into too much detail. Yeah, some smaller things showing the object. Yeah, I think that's not even so interesting. Something that's pretty cool is the naming scheme, at least for me. So if you have a frame and then you start inserting objects like station, then you will see that as before, the first object that was inserted is simply named station. But now the second object is now called station 2 and then station 3. And in the previous versions, this one would have been station, and then this station 1 and this station 2, which somehow always could give the impression that there are actually only 2 stations, because the one with the highest number was the number 2. So this was, at least for me, I thought this was always a little confusing. Of course, if you're used to working with arrays that start counting at 0, may not be so confusing, but yeah, if you show this to a customer that is not a programmer, this was always a little weird. So now by default, the second station that you insert is now named station 2, which I find very nice and consistent, because I always had to rename objects that I inserted into the model. Right. Another nice feature is that you can now use the attribute list F8 for multiple objects at once. So you can select these two conveyors and then press F8 to show the attributes. And this will now show you the attributes, the attribute values that they have in common, or that they don't have in common. So for these, they are pretty similar. So I have to scroll a little bit, but you can see here that the name is pretty obviously different, because this is conveyor 1 and this is conveyor 2. And they also have a different random seed. You can see this here. So it doesn't display the name, because I have now 2 objects selected. But for all the attributes that are the same, like the current speed, or the target speed, and also the length, you will see that it shows the value that these objects have in common. And you can also now go here and change this the attributes for all the objects at once. So if I go now back into this one, now this one has a speed of 0.6, and this one as well. So this makes it pretty nice and easy to change attribute values for several objects at once without opening 10 dialogues and then finding the text box and clicking apply and so on. So yeah, and also for comparing what attributes are still the same, what attributes are different. I think that's a very useful UI feature. The undo and redo functionality in the 3D of 3D actions in the 3D viewer has been enhanced. So there are now even more actions that you can undo, all related to 3D. I don't have a specific example here, but you can browse the help. It will list what new or what actions are now also undoable or redoable. So this has been enhanced again a little bit. And then the last general addition is what I already used here. The software is now using a new version of the Edge browser, which basically enables you to do something like I did here with this button, and then opening like a PDF document right inside Plant Simulation without external software opening up. So I simply put the release notes as a PDF next to my model file, and now I can just open it with a button right inside the software. So I think that's also can be pretty nice if, for example, you have some external documentation of your model. In previous versions, you were able to embed something like a PDF file into your model, but if you then wanted to open it, you would still need to have the external application like a PDF viewer or something, and that is now no longer the case. You can simply do everything right inside Plant Simulation itself. Right, then for some of the example models, some new functions. For the AGVs, there is a small new function available that is called rotate towards. So for the free-moving AGVs, which is a simple one-liner that you can use to rotate the AGV so that it faces a target object. So in this case here, I don't need to know whether I need to rotate clockwise or counterclockwise 90 degrees, or whether I need to rotate at all to like face this conveyor. It's basically a simple one-liner where you say my AGV rotate towards, and then you give the 3D position of the object. So theoretically, it wouldn't even have to be an object. So you simply rotate so that you face towards a certain 3D position. Right, and there is also a new method, get route length, which was available for the track and for the vehicles before. Now this is also available for markers, so you can calculate the route length from one marker to another marker and use that in your routing. If you want to rotate the AGV so that its backside faces a certain object, you can now also do this, but this is a little more tricky. I've built this into this model, into this method. It's a little more code. You don't have to get into it. Of course, the other option would be to simply mirror the AGV graphic so that physically it's pointing forward toward the conveyor, but you simply mirror the graphic of the AGV so that it looks like this. Right, those are just some two small new functions when you work with free moving AGVs. I find it quite useful. This one I think I'll skip. I did this for Dave. This is not so nice to show. For the workers, there were some improvements or some enhanced features, more specifically for the worker chart. So I have some workers here working in the two stations, and they are part of two different worker pools. And you can now simply use the basic chart object to show worker statistics by different aggregation levels. So maybe you knew the old special object worker chart, which was a library that you had to import. Now you can simply do this with a basic chart object by drag and dropping a worker pool onto the chart. You can then select what kind of grouping or aggregation you want to use. So you can do that in the dialog, and then the charts will look different depending on what grouping you use. But it's very similar to the if you know the old object worker chart. So here on the left, I'm showing the average statistics for all the workers inside one worker pool. So you see at the moment, the guy from my second pool hasn't been working at all. And here on the right chart, I do not group by pool, but instead I show the different lines of the worker creation table. So in this case, I have two lines with one worker each. So I get a separate statistics bar here. And you see now in the background, one of the guys had to start working because the worker pool 2 is a repair worker. So now there was a failure and he did some repairing. Yeah. So this is an easy way to get more advanced or better worker statistics as compared to registering the workers yourself with SimTalk or drag and dropping worker instances on the chart or whatever. You don't need a special object library anymore. You can just use the basic chart and yeah, choose a different aggregation of the statistics. Then for the assembly station and also for the store, so here I have two things combined in this model. For the assembly station, you can now use sequential assembly, which means that you can now define in the assembly table you can define for each line what part you need, how many units of the part you need, and now, and this is new, for each of these lines you can define their assembly time and then also a sequence number. And here in this case, I used different sequence numbers and then 1 time for each row, which means the worker must bring the parts in this sequence. So sequence number 1, the wheels of my little chair here, they have to be brought first, and then some parts of the seat, and then lastly the armrests. She's floating around in the air above his head, but and then after each part he has brought to the assembly station, he has to spend 5 seconds assembling this part before he can proceed to work on the next part. And then at the end, he could have some total final assembly time to finish up the whole product. And this is now a very easy way to have a more realistic assembly process. Before, you had to do quite some programming and maybe even tricking the assembly station if you wanted some behavior like this. And now it's very easy to define a specific sequence in which the parts are needed, in which they have to be assembled, and also have some assembly times in between the process. So obviously it's a very different behavior if I would tell him to first collect all the 6 parts and then spend 30 seconds, or bring 1 part, spend 5 seconds, and then check if the second part is available or not, spend 5 more seconds. Because in the old mode, you could not start your 30 seconds of assembly until all the parts are available, which would, in some cases, of course, this will be the realistic behavior, so you can still have that. But in other cases, this is not realistic. He will start assembling with whatever parts he has, if they are right in the sequence, and if the rest is not available, that's not a problem. Yeah, so you can now easily do this in the assembly table or assembly list of the assembly station. And then something else that you see him doing here when he's picking up the parts, he is walking not to this workplace here, or at least the animation is not walking to this workplace, because the store, or the combination of the workplace and the store, now has a new option where you can define how the worker should be walking when he's picking up parts or dropping parts at the store. And you have the old behavior, so we always walk to the workplace, which is in this case in the middle of the storage area of the rack, and then assume that this average time is sufficient. But you can also now choose what I have active here, walk to store column. So he will walk a little less far if he has to get the part from up here, and he has to walk to the bottom of the store if he has to get the parts from down here. So now he's walking to the column, one of my 6 storage columns here, where he's going to take the part from or deliver it to. So this is, again, you would have been able to do this in previous versions, but it would have been, I think, quite a bit of work or using additional objects. And now this is now very easy to activate, to have some more realistic behavior of the workers. And another thing that has been added or enhanced at the assembly station is that you can now use an assembly station that has only one predecessor, which is now my source here. And probably the most straightforward application of this would be something like a pallet stacker. So I simply have a source here that is creating pallets, and then this assembly station is stacking them. I can't recall, 5 or 6 pallets high. Yeah, so six pallets in total. So it's taking one pallet, considers it as the main part, and then I'm using the predecessors mode, which is the only mode that is working with this only one predecessor setup. But you are now allowed to enter the main part predecessor number into this table. So here I've said, please add 5 times one part from the main part predecessor on top of your main part. And that essentially this means the first pallet that goes in is considered as the main part, and then I have to assemble 5 more pallets on top. I'm using the sequential assembly here as well, so it always takes, I think, 5 seconds for each pallet to get stacked on top of the other ones. And then I have some final assembly time of 10 seconds to complete the whole stack and send it out. Yeah. So this is the most straightforward application. If you have something like a pallet stacker or a box stacker, or a tray stacker, things like that. Again, it was possible with the previous versions if you use some dummy predecessor objects or flow controls and stuff like that, or Syntorg. But it was always a little messy. Now it's simply available as a built-in function. So I like this one very much, even though it's just a very small feature technically. Another feature that has been added is related to the conveyors. If you've worked with conveyors before, you may know that they have these MU distance settings, where before you could choose a MU distance type, you had like gap and pitch and minimum gap and minimum pitch. These were the settings that were available in the previous versions. And now what is new is the settings multiple gap and pitch, which you can easily use to simulate something specifically here, like a power and free kind of system. So I have activated for all the grayish or brownish conveyor. These are all conveyors, right? So they are simply animated in 3D as suspension tracks or rails from which the parts are hanging. So these are all basic conveyor line objects. And I've activated a multiple gap setting to a distance of 20 centimeters, which means that whenever I want to enter one of these conveyors, I have to, you maybe were able to see it briefly, when I transfer from this one to this one, I have to make sure that I'm in one of these 20 centimeter gaps or pitches, which in this case means there is a hook running on the conveyor every 20 centimeters on the chain, and the chain is continuously rotating. And if I want to be transported, I have to wait for a hook. So I cannot travel on these conveyors now at any random position, only in intervals of 20 centimeters. And here in this case, you don't really see a lot in the animation, a lot or a big difference. But I would say that this is a very easy way now of having a much more realistic simulation of something like a power and free system. Yeah, which may be different if you have like different spacings, different MU sizes. Maybe it will be more visible, but this is something, a type of project that I've been working a lot on in the past, and yeah, they would have been quite a bit easier with this new feature. So anyway, I'm glad that it's available now. Right, and then two more small things that I've used in this model is that you can now also use the attribute destination was reached, which you may know if you've been working with specifically the free moving AGVs. I think it's where we use that typically a lot to find out when the AGV has reached its destination. And this attribute is now also working when you travel on a conveyor, and I think also on a track, and then you reach a sensor. If that sensor is your destination, now this attribute is also switched to true, which you can observe to use it in your controls to find out when a certain part has reached its destination. And I'm using this here in this method. So I generate my MUs, and then I I wait until the destination was reached, and then I switch the color of the MU to some standard color. And what is also new here is that you don't have to explicitly activate the 3D material of the MU. You can simply or directly say material diffuse color is green or red or whatever. And if the material was not active before, like in this case with all my MUs or representing some pouches or garments on hangers, so the material is not active, but at this target sensor, when I switch the color, the material gets activated automatically. And you can see it also here, these ones that are red, I made them red if they have to circle around or loop around one time because this section here was too full. Yeah, so also this is nice, you don't have to use two SymTalk lines of code anymore. And you also don't need this combined syntax of activate material, activate material something. I don't even recall what it's named, which was like a one-line call for activating the material and then setting a color. So this is now obsolete because you can simply directly set the color that you want. Right, so this is a little, it's not really showing much in the animation, but if you work with JSON in your models, then there were some enhancements as well. Actually, I don't recall if this is running. No, it's not running. Okay. So you can now use JSON literals directly in your SymTalk method, and you have a new function of read file and write file that you can use on JSON variables. So here in this example, I'm using it to read an external JSON file and then parsing it into my JSON variable in a one-liner, basically. And then I'm printing it to this comment so you can see it. So that's not very fancy so far. But this one here is where I'm simply using JSON literals right inside my SymTalk method. So if you're familiar with JSON, you will immediately see where I'm doing it. So I don't need to do some string conversions or things like that. I can simply directly manipulate the JSON here by using JSON literals in SymTalk, similar to, I think, the 2404 version or 2302 version, when Siemens added the functionality of using time literals right inside your SymTalk method. So you no longer had to write 3600 if you wanted to represent an hour. You can now write 1:0:0 to represent an hour, which in some cases may be much more clearer if you look at the method later. So this is similar, but of course this is only relevant if you work with JSON. But I do, so this one was a nice enhancement as well. And I think this is the last example that I have prepared. Yes. This is a bigger one, at least regarding the code. So I don't know whether we should go into too much detail here, but this is regarding, it has two main parts. One is a function that you should definitely know about, and that is a great addition to the store object, which has now this method find free place in range, which allows you to define a partial range of the store where you want to look for a storage position. So up until now, the store had the method find free place, which would give you a free place. You had no control over where the part would be placed. I have to check where I'm using it. Right here. So here now I'm using find free place in range for the store, and I have two parts, and you could consider this like a high runner and a low runner, or whatever reasoning you have for using separate areas of your store object. But you can see I'm looking from the first until the fifth column for my part A. And for part B, I'm only using the columns 6 through 10 or 12, whatever I have in my store. So I'm not allowing the whole range of the store for part A, and for part B, they have separate storage zones. At least this is my first preferred setting. And then within this range, you can now also define whether you want to store from left to right, or from right to left, and top to bottom, or bottom to top, or bottom up. And you can also see this in the animation here, that the blue and the green parts are stored differently. Obviously, you can see the green part is part B, which is stored in the back of my store object, and the blue part is in the front. But you can also see that the green part is being stored from top to bottom, simply for showcasing this functionality, and the blue parts are stored from bottom to top. So this, I think, is an amazing enhancement if you work with the store object, and if you don't, I think you should. So this is pretty cool. And now the other thing that I'm showcasing here is regarding the MU animations, or specifically the poses and the animatable objects. So this one here, which, if you're familiar with these kind of systems, you probably have realized immediately should represent some storage and retrieval machine, or a stacker crane, however you call it, Regalbediengerät. And this is actually, you can see it in the tooltip. Probably the tooltip is a little small, but this is a basic single proc, or single proc kind of object that simply uses a 3D graphic that I've built myself here, with a simple graphic structure of having two animatable objects shifted into another. So I have an animatable object for the carriage, which is moving like left to right, and then my lift platform, which is sitting on top of that carriage. So if the carriage moves to the right, my platform has to follow. But this one is able to then travel up and down. So with this, I have a very easy stacker crane kind of object now. And the way I'm controlling it is by using these new functions. You can see that he has started retrieving some parts now. So if they turn red, then you see they need to be retrieved from the store. I'm using these new functions, move to MU and move to MU animation position. So I don't have to tell this animatable object, like move to coordinate blah blah, or move to angle 30 degrees or something, and calculate that stuff myself. I'm simply, let's see where I'm using this, like here in the setup time method. So I'm using move to MU. So this is here, in this case, this is a method of the animatable object, my carriage, and also of my lift. So both of these animatable objects, I tell them to move where the next part MU is located in the 3D realm. So I don't need to know its coordinates. I don't have to do calculations or things. I simply tell that my carriage, it has to move so that it gets as close as it can to the next part location, which in this case is move left or right, so that you get as close as possible to this part. and then the lift has to move up and down to get as close as possible to the MU. And in combination, this means that they will move right up to the next part. And as usual, so as you may know with the method that has been available for years, move to, this will return the time it takes the animatable object to travel there. And then here I'm simply using the max function to say whichever takes longer of the two elements, that's the total travel time I have for my stacker crane to reach the final destination. Right, and so this is basically for the pickup situation. So I move my animatable objects to where the MU is sitting, and then Plan Simulation automatically does all the 3D calculations and then orientation and stuff. And when I want to get it out, I use a similar approach. Right, so now I'm storing it. So I have to. So the first step that I showed you was basically traveling to the part that is sitting here on my in-feed conveyor so that I can pick it up. And then after I have picked it up, I want to move to somewhere in my store. And for that purpose, I use the other function, move to MU animation position, which I'm using in the same fashion. I tell my animatable object what part it is I want to transport somewhere, and then also what is my target place, which in this case is the PE element of the store, so the XY coordinate position of the store object. And then again, Plan Simulation will automatically calculate where a certain rack or shelf, in this case, is located in space, and then move the animatable objects accordingly in the X and Z directions so that they align with the storage rack or storage shelf. Yeah, so this is, I think, by far the most complex example in the collection. So of course, you don't need to have understood the methods, and I also didn't show you all the methods. But this was the main idea that I got when I saw these new functions, that this would enable us to do stuff like this very easily, building stacker cranes, portal cranes, transfer cars. If you're not using the respective libraries, this would be gives you the power to easily build objects like this yourself with some nice 3D animations, and also respecting the physics. So also I don't have to do the calculations of how long does it take to travel to somewhere and define something here. My animatable objects have a speed, and then Plan Simulation calculates automatically how long it takes to travel to the first or to the last storage shelf. So overall, I think this gives you the power to easily have a nice visualization and also easily have the valid behavior without doing a lot of more complicated coding. So if you're not that advanced with coding, probably these methods will look complicated to you. But if you've tried building your own stacker crane object in Plan Simulation, I believe you will find this to be quite neat and sleek code. Right. And then, of course, since this is a simple single proc station object, you can use the resource utilization chart. And in this example, I did a small trick. So you see, I used setup time, and what I'm basically doing is I'm preparing my single proc in a way that traveling empty to the pickup position is what I'm doing, or applying a setup time for each single part that I'm handling, and then delivering the part is when the part is sitting on the station, so it's processing. So all I did was use the basic resource statistics chart, and then I simply switched the labels here because my working and setup portion is still the normal plant simulation statistic that you have. I only switched the labels for my chart. Now I can see how busy my stacker crane is working here in this system. This is no new feature, of course, but maybe you were not familiar with the fact that you can easily manipulate statistics like this. Right. So I think those were the examples that I've prepared. As I said, look into the release notes. There are loads of more functions of changes. I don't have a complete list. I wanted to say this at the beginning, but I forgot. So what I did not show you was any new features of the fluid objects, because it's only one, and also I never use fluid objects, so I don't even know what this means. And the other thing that is new that I also didn't show you here in this setup was regarding like interface objects, so MQTT, OPC UA kind of things, changes there. This would be more complicated to show in an example model, and also anything related to Python. I didn't show you here. I'm not a Python user in plant simulation, so I can't really say how big these changes are, but I asked some other guys and they said it's not like there's like world or drastic new functions in this Python stuff. But if you work with Python, of course, you should remember to look in the release notes and see what's new there. Right, so that's it from my side. Now, if you have some questions regarding what I've shown you or some other new features that we didn't talk about.
Yeah, I can read the first one if you need a minute to get to it.
Cool. Hi, Ryan. You're still here? The participant list is so long, I didn't even see who's in there. You can still input just the flat time for the assembly station. So you simply leave out the the new columns. So if you don't provide individual assembly times and sequence numbers, then it behaves just like in the previous versions. And then all of the parts have to be, again, assembled together, and they have to be ready all at once before the total assembly time starts. So then you have the previous behavior. Steve asked, is this crane standard in PlantSim version 25? It has a lift table but no fork. I don't exactly know what you mean with standard. If you're referring to the last model that I showed you, obviously this is not standard because I built it myself. I assume this question came up before I explained that this is a single prog object with custom 3D graphics. So yeah, it's not standard. It's a single prog with customized 3D graphics. Then Blake is asking about exchanging the 3D graphic group of the MU. Perhaps an MU is traveling on the hook and stops at certain locations to receive more sub-assemblies from offline workers and needs to be visualized differently. I don't know why you would want to exchange a 3D graphic group. Changing the visualization to highlight the progress of assembly is what you typically would use making graphic groups visible or invisible, so showing or hiding them based on your assembly progress. So I don't specifically know whether you can exchange a graphic. I mean, you can exchange the whole MU graphic with SimTalk, but that will replace everything. Since your question specifically mentioned exchanging a 3D graphic group, so one of possibly multiple groups of the MU graphics, I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but you can exchange the MU graphics as a whole, and you can set individual graphics groups visible or not visible by using SimTalk. And that's typically what I would use here. So the MU would consist of several graphic groups. for the different assembly steps, and then I would hide and show graphic groups based on the assembly progress. Jeremy asks, I'm quite new to PlanSim. Are all versions 100% backward compatible? I'm not sure in which direction this question is asked. If you have a model that was created in a previous version, you can always open it in the newer versions and work on it there. Of course, it may behave differently if there are new features or things have been changed or fixed. So, of course, the behavior may be different, but it's no problem to open any old, well, I don't know about 100% any, but if it's like 20 years old, maybe you will run into some problems. But theoretically, yes, you can open any model that was saved in an older version in a newer version. The other way around is 100% not possible. So if you have saved your model in version 25.04, you can absolutely not open it in any previous version for obvious reasons. But Jesper asks where and when the recording will be available. I assume, Taryn, it will probably be
Friday.
This Friday already?
Yes, this Friday. So
yeah.
Eastern time, so it may be quite late for some people in Europe, but
yeah. Right, and it will be made available in the community, and it is also, I think, as usual, will be posted on YouTube. So
yes.
So the stacker crane cannot break when traveling between destinations. What would be the concept for disruption modeling? Well, you could add a failure profile to this single proc station, and by default, the pose movement, I think now I'm not 100% sure in what cases it works, but in some cases it will work straight out of the box. If you have a failure, that the pose movement will stop. I think it depends on how your graphic structure is, what kind of animatable objects there are. But of course, what you could then do if this was not working straight out of the box, you would add an observer on the failure attribute and then pause the movement. So like you can already do with poses and self animations, I think also self animations, you can pause the movement, so the 3D animation. If you want to have this, like, I mean, this is just an animation thing, right? So with this setup, if my station is failed, neither my setup nor my processing time can proceed. So the delivery would be interrupted, and it would take longer until the part can be delivered. If you don't add this bit of Zimtor code, it would simply mean that the animation would finish this one movement before the failure becomes visible by the stacker crane not moving anymore. So yeah, I would argue it may not be necessary to even do that. But yeah, if you want to, then you would have to interrupt pause the pose movement. Ryan is following up about an AI co-pilot. Are we there yet? Well, I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm not from Siemens. So I can only tell you what we've seen at the user conference in Amsterdam. So we did see some new beta tests and things. I know that some customers, there are some people who've been acting as beta testers, but this is still ongoing. It has not been released yet. And I also don't have a definite timetable or time schedule as to when this will really come out. I was actually hoping that it would be released in Amsterdam, but it wasn't. Yeah, right. Carlos is asking, this new Plan Simulation version is now available. It has been available since the end of April. That's why it's called 25.04. So this has been out since end of April. You can download it from the support center. And we are already on patch level, let's see, 4. So there's already been 4 patches out, which makes sense, 1 patch a month since end of April. Yeah, so you can go to the support center and download it there. And of course, you would need a new license for this. Vladimir, I've mentioned a call like get standard color in one of the examples. Oh yeah, it's a standard function in new versions. I think this was added in last year's version. I used it in this one here. So get standard color. So this is not a new function. It has been, at least in last year's version, this gives you 1 of 30 colors. So you can pass here a number from 1 to 30, and then it gives you 1 of a set of predefined colors. So you don't have to use DMake RGB kind of stuff, which to be honest, I still use this if I want to have a specific color, because I can't be bothered to look up or find out what color is 2 and what color is 3. But I do use this color if I simply want to show like different orders or different part types, and I don't care about the specific color. I just want to show that it's a different type, a different order, whatever. Then you can use this to easily have up to 30 different colors for your MUs or whatever. Yeah. But it's definitely available in 2404.
So yeah, if you didn't click on the link already, you can see it here on the screen, hopefully. Yeah, there's the forums. You can click it there as well. That's a short URL for it. And the animation is just showing what I mentioned in the comment, which is to click follow and then go to that envelope icon and choose every post. That makes sure that you'll get a system message as soon as it's uploaded. And as soon as we post the invite for the next session, you'll get a system email that invites you. And these are the next 2 sessions. You can also click on those links. So September 3rd is going to be Perl chain optimization with a genetic algorithm. And then September 17th is going to be worker crane synchronization. So both of those Stefan is going to present for September. So you can register for them today if you like by clicking there. But of course, we will be putting those registration links in the forums as well. So that's pretty much it for my side. Alex already shared that link, which is on the screen, for his community profile at the beginning of the session. So you can definitely find him there. And as was mentioned, the recording will be in the forums on Friday. And if you have a question, you can probably, right, Alex, mention you there if you have a question about anything that was presented on this session. So any final words before we head out, or one last question if you slip it in before we hang up?
I would ask that you, even if you don't have questions, that maybe you go there and you could post what you thought, what were cool new features that you find useful or that you're going to use, or also where you would say, it was totally boring and unuseful. Would just be interesting to me to see which ones you resonate with the most, because of course I have some favorites, but yeah, I also selected only those that were somehow useful to me. So yeah, I would find it nice if somebody goes up there and says, yeah, this one was cool, or this one was kind of meh. Yeah. But if you also hit me up with questions, yeah, perfect.
Nice. Well, there you have it. So that is us. Yeah, we got some thanks in the chat. We definitely saw the applause. Thanks, Alex. Always nice to hear from different voices in the community experts. So if there's no other questions for today, we will see you all in the forums and hopefully back online next 2 weeks from now, September 3rd. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.